it's Thursday, and that means we're featuring the best in the country. Phil Steele is with us, philsteele.com. Here's the college football preview magazine. You know that's just a Bible to the Division I coaches around the country. And here's Phil's 2012 pro football preview fantasy football guide, and that just as valuable. How are you this week, partner?
Hey, real good. Bruce, how about yourself?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to another week of college and pro ball. Let's get to a few games last week. LSU just impressed the heck out of me with their defense in that second half. Again, Phil, Auburn gave a valiant effort, but this and when you consider the kids that, Miles is running a tough ship down there. He's not putting up with anything, but LSU again they could be playing for the national championship, it seems. They're good enough again this year.
And ironically, it was this game against Auburn that has dropped LSU in the polls. They actually fell from number 2 to number 3, and many folks across the country had them number 4 on their AP ballot because they felt it was an unimpressive win against Auburn. But I, like you, Bruce, thought they played great on defense, limiting Auburn at 183 yards. They finished with a 15-9 first down advantage in the game. And while they trailed that game 10-9 late in the third quarter, once they got the lead and went up 12-10, Auburn really didn't have a chance of scoring after that. Even their last drive of the game only got to midfield. So it's a game where I think at the end of the game when they interviewed Les Miles, he seemed almost happy that he had a close game for once. Remember the Washington blowout,
right,
and the other two as well. So while they dropped a little bit in the polls, I think that maybe they gained a little bit in the locker room by having a close game, and I think LSU will be a better team for it. And keep in mind, that is a series where the home team had actually won 11 of the last 12.
I didn't know that. And, right now, Phil, the polls don't really mean much.
No, and in the SEC, Bruce, if you go undefeated and win the SEC, you're in the national championship game. I don't care if you're 20th in the polls right now.
Absolutely. I wouldn't ask for your comments on this game, except I was so stunned by the final outcome. Oregon 49, Arizona nothing. That's not a bad Arizona team, Phil.
Yeah, it's not. And it's a game where Arizona just blew their opportunities in the red zone. In fact, you look at the final, and I've heard a lot of folks around the country talking about how Oregon's defense shut out Arizona. And while they didn't allow any points in the game, they were sort of fortunate not to. In the first half alone, Arizona on 4th and goal from the 4 had a bad snap on a field goal, and the Ducks took over. They had a first down at the Oregon 12-yard line and were intercepted. They had a 4th and goal, and they got stopped on downs. They had a 31-yard field goal blocked. They fumbled at the 19-yard line. And in the second half, another blown opportunity. They were intercepted at the 12-yard line of Oregon. In fact, as I mentioned, the first punt of the game didn't happen until 3:59 to go in the second quarter. They were moving the football. 19 first downs for Arizona in that game, 332 yards. And for Oregon, 2 of their touchdowns, interception returns for touchdowns. So their offense was actually held to 35 points. Overall, Arizona played a pretty good game against a loaded Duck team in Autzen Stadium, but the scoreboard a little misrepresentative of the fact. And for the game, Oregon only had a 25-19 first down edge.
I thoroughly enjoyed watching Florida State outlast Clemson. And the reason is because of your prediction at the beginning of the season. If you're unaware, Phil predicted that Florida State will play Oklahoma for the national championship. We'll get to Oklahoma in a couple of minutes. But I can see why now you like Florida State. This Manuel and their offense, Phil, I thought Clemson's a very good team. They're a dangerous team. But are you concerned, as dynamite as Florida State is offensively, are you concerned that their defense gave up that many points?
A little bit. I was concerned in the first half how Clemson moved the football. In fact, in the first half, Clemson put up 253 yards against them, but in the second half, they basically shut them down until that final garbage drive at the end when they went 69 yards and got a touchdown with about a minute left in the game. And keep in mind, one of their touchdowns came on a halfback option pass. Florida State's All-American kicker missed 2 field goals. Florida State fumbled a punt, setting up a Clemson touchdown. And even after all that, Florida State still led the game 49-31. I think it's going to be tough for any team in the country to hold Clemson under 28 points this year. They're that loaded with Ellington, Hopkins, and Ford. So due to the offense that they faced, I'm okay with Florida State, and I still feel Florida State has the best defense in the country this year, and you're going to see that as the season rolls on. But you had to really be impressed with Florida State offensively. That's where their question marks were coming into the season. E.J. Manuel looked phenomenal, both running and passing the ball. Chris Thompson, a breakaway threat. James Wilder, a powerhouse runner. And they've got a lot of no-name receivers who are just 6'4" with great speed and hands and catch the ball no matter where you threw it. I'm very impressed with Florida State. That was their toughest game they're going to face all year, and I think they're really set for a collision course with the national championship game.
Outside of South Carolina, is there anybody else in the ACC that can beat Clemson?
I think Clemson runs the table the rest of the year. When you look at the rest of the ACC schedule that they have, I think they'll be favored in every game, and they get South Carolina at home in that game. I actually think Clemson goes 11-1 with their only loss of the year being to Florida State. Wow.
They impressed the heck out of me. All right, Oklahoma. Now, did you have Oklahoma perhaps a little overrated, or is Kansas State that good?
Well, the one thing that happened with Oklahoma since I wrote the magazine is they lost 2 starting offensive linemen to injuries. They went from having the most experienced offensive line in the Big 12, and there's only 10 teams in the Big 12, all the way down to the number 8 most experienced offensive line. But really in this game, the 3 turnovers were huge as to when they occurred. You know, Oklahoma had the lead when their quarterback Landry Jones fumbled into the end zone and Kansas State fell on it for a touchdown. Oklahoma was driving with the lead when their backup quarterback Bell came in for the Belldozer series. He fumbled into the Kansas State end zone, costing Oklahoma 7 points. And at the end of the game, Oklahoma's up 13-10. Landry Jones throws a crucial interception. Kansas State drives 38 yards for a touchdown. If you take away any one of those turnovers, I think Oklahoma probably wins the football game. But I got to hand it to Bill Snyder. He was my college coach of the year last year. This guy knows how to pull an upset. And if I was a head coach, the one guy I wouldn't want to see on the opposing sidelines is Bill Snyder. He gets the most out of the least. I thought Kansas State played a great game, an opportunistic game, and they are going to be a very good team this year. I don't think they're one of the top 5 or 10 teams in the country, but another great game for Coach Bill Snyder.
Would you concede that half of your prediction will not make it now? This loss was so costly to Oklahoma because you didn't have an SEC team in that championship.
Yeah, and, you know, if a team from the SEC can go unbeaten, I think it's going to be tough because they all play some very tough schedules. They're naturally in the championship game. But a couple other teams to look at going back to the Big 12. My number 1 surprise team this year was Texas, a non-top 10 team I thought could have a chance. Now that Texas-Oklahoma game looks a little more winnable for them. And then Oregon, of course, has a great chance out west. So, no, Oklahoma has absolutely zero chance of playing in the title game. Florida State, I think, has a great chance.
Yeah, the Florida State looks great. I thought Notre Dame's game was so emotional to watch because of this Teo. Heaven knows what could have been on this kid's mind. He's a great player, but to lose his grandmother and his girlfriend at such a young age because of leukemia, and he goes out and plays the kind of game that he did, plus the defense for Notre Dame is for real.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And, I said on the show last week the key to this game was Notre Dame containing Denard Robinson, and that they did. And Denard Robinson really shot Michigan in the foot numerous times. They had 6 turnovers, 5 of them caused by Denard Robinson, 4 interceptions and a fumble. Michigan actually finished with a 299, 239-yard edge. Now, Teo actually suffered those losses the previous week, and he played a lights-out game that week as well. He is really looking like a dark horse national title contender, a Heisman title contender this year, because he played that great game last week against Michigan State, duplicated it again this past week. Clearly one of the best defensive players in the country, and I think he's starting to get a lot of publicity. Notre Dame's got a legitimate defense. They're starting to climb in the polls. I'm really interested, too, a couple of weeks from now when Notre Dame hosts Stanford. I think that's going to be a great game on October the 13th.
Yeah, they've got such a brutal schedule. They got Oklahoma coming up. But what do you think about him putting Rees in for Golson? Can he keep that up?
You know, Brian Kelly's had a history of this. If you go back to Cincinnati, there were years where he played 5 or 6 quarterbacks, and really, I think he just goes into the locker room saying it's just like any other position. If you're not doing your job, we've got a capable backup behind you. I do actually agree with him. I think Golston, if you look at the athletic talent that Everett Golston has, he's a guy that's your quarterback of the future. Let's get him as much work as possible, and if for some reason you need a veteran leader like Reese off the bench, he's got him waiting in the wings. I'd continue with Golston as my starter, continue to use Reese off the bench, and really, if you watch Tommy Reese last year, maybe he's better off the bench than he is as a starter because he wasn't all that impressive as a starter last year.
Well, I know that Teo went to Hawaii because they got an off week this week. Last game I want to ask you about from this last weekend is UCLA. Just when you thought that they are finally going to be back, they get knocked off here by Oregon State 27-20, but this is a good Oregon State team.
Yeah, you know, and the ironic thing here, Bruce, is Oregon State was picked last by the Pac-12 media in their division in the Pac-12. In fact, in the Pac-12 voting, they generally came in as the weakest team in the Pac-12 this year besides Colorado. But Oregon State, I had higher than that. In fact, I had them picked higher than everybody else in the country, but I still only had them number 4 in their division. But some players really impressed me for Oregon State this past week. Sean Mannion has proved what I write about the magazine every year, a quarterback in the second year of Mike Riley's offense always has a much better year. How about 24 or 35 for 379 yards? They've got a running back in Storm Woods who's outstanding, 2 breakaway receivers, and Marcus Wheaton and Brandon Cooks, and then Scott Crichton on the defensive line. This is a very talented Oregon State team, and they only had 1 game to UCLA's 3 coming in. I was very impressed with Oregon State and the job. I think both teams are going to have very impressive seasons.
All right, let's get to the college games coming up this weekend, and I want to start in the Big Ten with Illinois hosting Penn State. Penn State now on the board with a victory. The Fighting Illini are at home. This is almost a pick game. Illinois got the home field advantage. Penn State, of course, with that gigantic monkey on their back.
Yeah, and Penn State's got a little emotional advantage here in the fact that Illinois' coach Tim Beckman came onto Penn State's campus and openly recruited there when they were having their struggles. So Penn State's a little motivated for that. They've now got 2 wins under their belt. They're trying for 3 in a row. And Illinois last week lost to Louisiana Tech at home 52-24, but that was a game that was fueled by turnovers. They had 6 turnovers in the game. In fact, at the half, they had a 189 to 134 yard edge and trailed, and more of the same happened in the second half. I like the talent that Illinois has. If Nathan Scheelhaus can start and play the entire game, he only played about a quarter against Louisiana Tech, they're in good shape. They've got a good defense. They're a deeper team. While Penn State's been winning, I think that depth problems that they have are going to start to arise, especially on the road. I still think Illinois is a sleeper in the Big Ten and one that everybody's discounting after a couple of blowout losses this year. I look for Illinois at home to get a solid win over Penn State this week.
All right, a couple of MAC games I want to ask you about. First one is Ball State as a 1-point favorite here in Kent against Kent State.
And, you know, one of the most impressive coaching jobs this year is by Coach Lembo of Ball State. And I know every time I talk to him, this is a guy that's got all his I's dotted and T's crossed. He follows through on everything. They beat Indiana on the road. They beat South Florida, and they crushed Eastern Michigan. They've got a high-flying offense with Keith Wenning. Their running game is outstanding. Jawan Edwards already rushed for 430 yards this year, and he's got solid receivers. Now, there's no doubt Kent State has a massive defensive edge coming into the game here. Much better players on the defensive side of the ball, but they've got a lot of questions offensively. I like the Archer-Durham combination of running back, Spencer Keith at QB, but Ball State's definitely got the offensive superiority. So this game to me looks like a toss-up. Kent's with the better defense at home. Ball State with the far better offense and playing extremely well. Won't be intimidated after going into Indiana and coming out with the win. I think Ball State's got a chance of the upset this week.
All right, let's go to Akron, where Terry Bowden is getting his feet wet. And I saw, we aired his show here on STO, and he seems like a new man, Phil. He's excited. He's really up about this opportunity. He feels his team is off to a good start, and they're at home this week against Miami of Ohio.
Yeah, and I think for the talent that he inherited, he's doing a phenomenal job so far this year. I look at Game 2, when they went in to face Florida International on the road. And this is a Florida International team I think will challenge for the Sun Belt title by the end of the year. They took them to overtime. They only lost by 3. They, of course, blasted Morgan State. And then at the half last week, they're tied with Tennessee, 23-23. The key to their resurgence has been the quarterback play. He brings in Dalton Williams, who ran the same type of offense in the FCS, and he's really thrived in Bowden's offense, hitting 60% with a 10-6 ratio. Now, Miami of Ohio, on the other hand, has been completely underwhelming. With the exception of that first quarter they played against Ohio State, where they probably outplayed the Buckeyes for one quarter, their other 3 games have been sort of blah and under the radar, and they haven't looked good. Zach Dysert with only a 5-3 ratio this year. But if you line up these two teams on paper, talent-wise, I got to give a large edge to Miami of Ohio. And now, the fact that Akron's been playing so much better and Miami's been struggling, I don't think they're going to look past Akron. I think if this game's played prior to the start of the year, Miami's probably a 2 to 3 touchdown favorite in the game. But right now, it's priced very cheap. I like Miami of Ohio to come into Akron and get the win this week.
All right, let's go to the Big 12, where I know you're real high on Texas. They've got a road game at Oklahoma State. Hard to gauge about Oklahoma State this year. They massacre one team. They get out-slaughtered in another game. I don't know how to figure the Cowboys this season, but I know you're high on the Longhorns.
Yeah, and I think Oklahoma State's a legitimate ranked football team this year, and at the end of the year, they're probably going to end up inside the top 20. So they're a top 20 caliber team. That Arizona loss, they had a true freshman going on the road, making his first road start in Wes Lunt. They were down by 7. Lunt threw an interception return for a touchdown, and despite the fact they actually had a 636 to 501 yard edge, they lost. These two teams, when you look at them on defense, I got to give the edge to Texas. Last year, Texas allowed about 150 yards per game less. Texas has improved on defense. They've got a couple of book-rushing defensive ends, which can really disrupt them. But Oklahoma State does have an improved D this year. Offensively, once again, I'm going to give the edge to Texas. They've got running backs like Malcolm Brown and Jonathan Gray, who are my number 1 running backs coming out of high school. I think they're going to have outstanding careers. Joe Bergeron, a very deep backfield. And David Ash, their quarterback, now entering his second year, is hitting 76% with a 7-0 ratio. Meanwhile, for Oklahoma State, Wes Lunt, their true freshman quarterback, got injured last week against Louisiana. J.W. Walsh comes off the bench, and it's 34 of 51 for 496 yards and guides the team to 65 points despite being thrown into the mix. But I still think Texas is better on offense, better on defense, better on special teams, and even though Oklahoma State's had their number the last couple of years, this is a game Texas gets a revenge. Look for Texas to get this big win this week.
All right, let's go to the Southeastern Conference. I'm looking forward to this game. It's an afternoon affair between Georgia and Tennessee. It's in Georgia. Now, I know you're very high on Georgia in the Southeastern Conference Eastern Division, but I told you how impressed I was with Tennessee, even in defeat to Florida. That Bray and company can put some points on the board.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there 100%, Bruce. I think Tennessee's going to give Georgia a very good football game. Remember what they did against NC State in the opener? Probably won that one easier than 35-21. And I've never seen a team who nationally, folks have changed their opinions on one team from a week-to-week basis. Coming into the season, most of the folks on ESPN were saying NC State's going to whip Tennessee. After Tennessee whipped them, they said, well, Tennessee's going to beat Florida. Now, after they lost to Florida, well, they're just an average team. I don't think they're an average team. I think they're the most experienced team that they've had in the Dooley era. They're very strong on offense with Tyler Bray, a quarterback, Hunter and Cordero Patterson, a receiver. And the running game's starting to come on this year with Rajon Neal. Defensively, vastly improved over last year as well. Now, Georgia's the better football team. They're at home, but they do have a big game looming next week against South Carolina. And I think if you take Tennessee the least bit lightly, Hunter and Patterson can make you pay for it. So I think Tennessee's going to give Georgia a game. Take this one right down to the wire this weekend. Should be a great one to watch.
And Tennessee, or I should say Georgia's almost a 2-touchdown favorite. So you hear where Phil is coming from there. All right, let's go to the Pac-12. Obviously, everybody thinks of Southern Cal and Oregon. These two teams are kind of like in the second tier. They're both going to be bowl-bound. How good are they? Phil just talked about Oregon State. They're a 2.5-point dog on the road at Arizona that just got annihilated.
Yeah, and as mentioned, Arizona wasn't as bad as that final score would indicate last week, and they already did beat Oklahoma State at home 59-38, which was a very impressive win. When I talked to Coach Rodriguez this offseason, I was very impressed with. He was going over every offensive player, very impressed with the offense. We get to the defense, not quite as impressed. I think Oregon State has a large edge on defense. Scott Christian on the defensive line is one of the underrated players out there, and I really like these skill players that Oregon State brings to the table. Now, it's tough for any team to go on the road in conference play and win, and then go on the road as an underdog and win again the next week. But I think this Oregon State team is capable of just that. So I think the Beavers go on the road as a dog this week and pull off the upset. I thought they played a much better UCLA team on the road last week and sort of dominated the football game. I like Oregon State this week.
All right, this next game is a Big Ten matchup between two teams that certainly figure to be in the hunt for their respective divisional crowns. Nebraska is at home against Wisconsin. Again, Wisconsin last week beat UTEP 37-26. Obviously, Nebraska, Wisconsin, both have been knocked off. There's nobody from the Big Ten that can possibly make it to the BCS championship, with Ohio State, of course, being on probation. This is a tough game to call, I would think.
So you're not calling for Northwestern or Minnesota to go undefeated, Bruce?
I am being presumptuous, my friend.
When you take a look at this matchup, and it's what I've marked down as my matchup for the Big Ten title game at the start of the year, I think it could still be that, despite Wisconsin's troubles early in the season. Now, I think they corrected their problem after the Oregon State loss. They fired their offensive line coach who was trying to shift their schemes. Why in the world you would mess with Wisconsin's blocking schemes on the offensive line when year in and year out it's the best in the country really boggles my mind. The next week, in the new schemes, they had 156 yards against Utah State, but last week, about 213 yards against UTEP. And I like their new running back, the redshirt freshman Melvin Gordon. He may just be the best running back on the team, and that's making quite a statement because Monty Ball is still on the roster. It's a good Wisconsin team, one you're going to see get better and better as the season goes on, and I still think they find themselves in the Big Ten title game, but I'm very high on Nebraska this year. They did lose that game against UCLA, a very tough team, but remember Rex Burkhead didn't play, and one of the most improved quarterbacks in the country is Taylor Martinez. This guy, if he could complete a pass, was a shock in the past. He was a 50% quarterback with a poor ratio. Well, this year, how about 70% with a 9-1 ratio? He went to all kinds of quarterback camps in the offseason. Everybody talked about how he's improved. I see it. And Rex Burkhead, who's basically missed the last 3 games, will be back in the lineup. Plus, remember last year, they had that close game against Wisconsin, and then Martinez blew it. He threw 3 straight interceptions. Wisconsin turned into 3 straight touchdowns. They got spanked on the road, 48-17. They got a little payback going for them here as well. I'm going to take the team that's playing at a higher level with the better offense at home with legitimate revenge. I like the Huskers to win this one by about 2 to 3 touchdowns.
That's a lot of points they're giving up, though, Phil.
Yes, it is, and it's tough because I understand Wisconsin, how dangerous they are, but this is a situation where if Nebraska has a chance, they will score that extra touchdown at the end. All
right, let's get to the Big Ten opener for the Buckeyes. Unblemished record so far, but certainly some flaws. Tackling's been a problem, but Braxton Miller looking awfully good. I think he's so much further ahead of where Pryor was at this point. Michigan State's another team that's hard to figure. They're at home at East Lansing. Ohio State, Michigan State, Big Ten opener. How do you look at this one?
Well, I think after the last 2 offenses that Ohio State faced, and Cal and UAB won those wide-open spreads, and keep in mind, last week was a C-game performance for Ohio State. They had no interest in UAB. UAB was a team where they were a massive favorite, and they just showed they didn't really show up to play in that particular game. But now they get back to an offense that's more of a run-between-the-tackles type with Levy and Bell, the one that's struggling at the quarterback position. Andrew Maxwell only hitting 56% with a 3-3 ratio. None of his receivers have really emerged this year either. I think Ohio State's defense is going to put on their best performance of the year against a quality offense. I think Michigan State's got a good offense. It just doesn't match up well with Ohio State. So with Ohio State able to pinch the line of scrimmage, I think you'll see them play their best game of the year. And offensively, it was just the Braxton Miller show for a while, but now they're getting Jordan Hall back. They're getting Carlos Hyde back. And you're going to see those running backs have a bigger focus. Now, this is not going to be a high-scoring game. It's going to be a defensive struggle because both teams' defenses defenses outdo the other team's offenses. So I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, something in maybe the 16-13 range. But I do think Ohio State has got more talent on offense at the quarterback position with Braxton Miller, and I like them to go on the road and keep their season unbeaten this year.
Wow, what a start that would be for Urban Meyer with Nebraska looming in Columbus the following week. All right, we're going to take a break. Here is Phil's college football preview magazine, the book the experts cannot, I repeat, cannot do without. When we return with the one and only Phil Steele,